Millionaire asks, black waitress, what she wants most. She jokes a day off. Next morning, black card arrives. Before we dive into her story, we'd love to know what simple thing would make your day better. A quiet cup of coffee? A phone call from a friend? Let us know in the comments below. The rain fell in sheets, blurring the already dim lights of Harmony Creek into a watercolor wash of misery. Inside the corner spoon, Lena Hughes moved with the practiced, weary grace of someone who had been on her feet for 14 hours. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her life, her inheritance, and her cage. The red vinyl on the booth seats was cracked like dry riverbeds, and the chrome trim on the counter was dull with the ghost of 1,000 spilled milkshakes. Above the door, the neon sign, a cheerful coffee cup, had been flickering for weeks, a frantic, buzzing pulse that mirrored the anxiety in Lena's own chest. Espion! Espion! It was dying, just like the business. Every cent she made went back into this place, a losing battle against rising food costs and dwindling customers. The townsfolk of Harmony Creek were polite enough, but a current of cool reserve followed her, the only black woman to own a business on Main Street. They came for the cheap coffee, but they saved their real patronage for the new franchise bistro down the road. Lena was an outsider, a relic, just like the diner her parents had poured their souls into. Tonight, the cash register held a pathetic collection of crumpled bills and coins, not even enough to cover the next delivery of potatoes. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket she'd grown accustomed to. The phone company had left another warning. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, had been sniffing around, his greedy eyes cataloging the prime real estate her failing diner occupied. She was wiping down the counter for the final time, her reflection a pale, exhausted ghost in the polished surface, when the bell above the door chimed softly. It was a sound so rare after 9 p.m. that it made her jump. A man stood just inside, dripping onto the checkered linoleum, shaking a fine mist from a long, dark coat. He wasn't from around here. He had the quiet, observant stillness of a traveler, his face etched with a weariness that Lena recognized instantly. It was the same exhaustion she saw in her own eyes. Her first instinct, born of bone-deep fatigue, was to tell him she was closed. The open sign was already flipped. Her whole body ached for the lumpy mattress in her small apartment upstairs. But then she saw the way he hunched his shoulders against a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. She saw the deep-set loneliness in his eyes. It was a look she knew well. Her own compassion. The one thing her hardship hadn't managed to erode, stirred. "Storm's getting worse," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Come on in. I can at least make you a pot of coffee." He gave a small, grateful nod and slid into the booth nearest the kitchen, the one with the biggest tear in the vinyl. Lena ignored it, turning to the coffee machine. The aroma of brewing coffee filled the small space, a familiar comfort against the drumming of the rain. She could feel his eyes on her as she moved, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a quiet, searching intensity. "I don't have much left," she admitted, setting a thick ceramic mug in front of him. "But I can make you a grilled cheese, some tomato soup. Whatever you have is fine," he said. His voice was low and gravelly, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. "Thank you." She moved back to the kitchen, her tired mind calculating. The last 2 slices of cheddar, the end of a loaf of bread, the final portion of soup she'd set aside for her own dinner. She hesitated for only a second before placing the bread on the griddle. His need, however temporary, felt more pressing than her own. As the sandwich sizzled, she glanced out at him. He sat perfectly still, hands wrapped around the warm mug, staring out at the rain-slicked street. He looked like a man at the end of a very long road. She served him the meal on her best plate, the one without any chips. The soup steamed invitingly. He looked at the simple food as if it were a banquet. "This looks wonderful," he murmured, picking up the sandwich. Lena just nodded and began her closing routine again, this time with an audience. She refilled the salt and pepper shakers and methodically wiped down the syrup dispensers. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a shared quiet, a respite from the storm outside and the storms within. After he finished eating, she refilled his coffee without asking. He watched her for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You run this place all by yourself?" "Mostly," Lena replied, polishing a spot on the counter that was already clean. "It was my parents' place. I took over after they passed." "It's a good place," he said simply. "It feels kind." The word struck her. Not clean, not fast, not cheap. Kind. A lump formed in her throat. "I try," she whispered. He fell silent again, sipping his coffee. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the slow passage of her life. He seemed to sense the weight of her unspoken struggles, the invisible burdens she carried in the slump of her shoulders. "If you could have anything in the world," he asked suddenly, his eyes meeting hers, "anything at all, what would it be?" The question was so vast, so absurd in its scale, that Lena felt a bubble of helpless laughter rise in her chest. Anything. An end to debt? A new neon sign? The respect of her neighbors? A life where she didn't have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying vegetables? The sheer ridiculousness of it, of this stranger asking this question in her failing diner at the end of another soul-crushing day, was too much. A dry, tired chuckle escaped her lips. "Honestly," she said, leaning her hip against the counter. She looked at her worn hands, the calluses on her fingers. "I'd love a day off. Just one. A day where I don't have to get up before dawn and I don't have to count pennies to see if I can afford bread. A day to just sleep." He didn't smile. He just nodded slowly, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "A day off," he repeated softly, as if committing it to memory. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He placed a $100 bill on the counter. "For the meal, and for the kindness." Lena stared at the bill. It was more than she'd made all day. "I can't take this. The meal was maybe $5. "Please," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Allow me." He stood up, shrugging back into his long coat. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "Thank you for the shelter, Lena." He used her name, which she realized she'd never told him. It was embroidered on her uniform, of course, but his use of it felt personal. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the night, leaving Lena standing alone in the quiet diner, staring at the impossible $100 bill. The brief respite the stranger's visit had provided vanished with the morning light. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a grim, unforgiving gray. Lena was sweeping the front step when Mr. Henderson's polished sedan pulled up to the curb. He emerged like a vulture from a car, his suit too expensive for their small town, his smile thin and predatory. "Lena," he said, the name sounding like an insult on his tongue. "Just the person I wanted to see." "Mr. Henderson?" she replied, her grip tightening on the broom handle. "The rent isn't due for another week." Plans change, he said, stepping closer. He ran a dismissive finger along the peeling paint of the window frame. I've had a very generous offer on this block. A developer. They want to put up a modern retail complex. Good for the town. He looked at her, his eyes cold. They're prepared to move very quickly, which means I need my tenants out. Lena's heart plummeted. We have a lease. A month-to-month lease, he corrected smoothly, which I can terminate at any time. However, I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a new lease. He named a figure that was triple her current rent. It was a number so impossibly high, he might as well have asked for the moon. She stared at him, speechless. He knew she couldn't possibly pay it. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. I thought not, he said with a smug sigh when she didn't answer. It's a shame, but a place like this, it's an eyesore. It's holding Harmony Creek back. He gave her a look that managed to be both pitying and contemptuous. You'll have the official 30-day notice by the end of the week. I'd start packing if I were you. He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Lena standing on the sidewalk, the broom feeling like a lead weight in her hands. The world seemed to tilt, the gray sky pressing down on her. 30 days. She had 30 days until she lost everything. Her home, her livelihood, the last tangible piece of her parents. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for months burned behind her eyes. She stumbled back inside the empty diner, the flickering sign above seeming to mock her. Espion. Like a countdown to her own ruin. She sank into a booth, the same one the stranger had occupied, and buried her face in her hands. The $100 bill was still in her apron pocket. A cruel joke. It was a fortune, and nothing all at once. What was $100 against the tide of disaster that was about to sweep her away? She was so lost in her misery that she didn't hear the light rap on the glass door. It was a courier, a young man in a crisp uniform, holding a small, flat, black box. "Lena Hughes?" he asked. She nodded numbly. He had her sign a digital pad and handed her the package. It was sleek, heavy, and utterly out of place in her worn-out diner. She sat with it in her lap for a long time, tracing its sharp, clean edges. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single card. It was matte black metal, cool and heavy to the touch, with her name, Lena Hughes, embossed in silver. Beneath it was a small, folded note, written on thick, creamy paper in elegant black ink. It read, "Take your day off," and then some. A.V. Arthur Vance, the quiet man from the storm. Lena stared at the card. It wasn't a gift card. It looked like a credit card, a type she'd only ever seen in movies, one that whispered of limitless wealth and access. Her mind reeled, the worn coat, the tired face. It was a disguise. The quiet traveler was someone powerful, someone who could send an object like this via a private courier as easily as she could pour a cup of coffee. The first twist of a story she couldn't comprehend was unfolding. This wasn't just a card. It was a key. A test. And she had no idea what door it was meant to open. The next 24 hours were a blur of anxiety and disbelief. The black card sat on her kitchen table upstairs, a silent, powerful enigma. She touched it occasionally, half expecting it to vanish. The temptation was a constant, gnawing presence. She could walk out the door, go to the bank, and pay Mr. Henderson his extortionate new rent. She could fix the sign, buy new vinyl for the booths, fill the pantry. She could solve all her problems. but the thought made her stomach clench. It felt wrong. It wasn't her money. It felt like a trap, a moral puzzle she couldn't solve. The man, AV, had thanked her for her kindness. Using his money to save herself felt like the opposite of that kindness. It felt selfish. The next afternoon, Mr. Henderson returned, a smug smile plastered on his face. He held out an official-looking envelope. "Eviction notice," he announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "I decided to expedite things. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." 24 hours? Lena whispered, her voice cracking. "That's not legal." "My lawyers assure me it is, given the circumstances of the sale," he lied smoothly. "You're trespassing as of noon tomorrow." He looked around the diner with disgust. "Honestly, I'm doing you a favor, putting this place out of its misery." He left, and the finality of his words crashed down on Lena. This was it. The end. She looked at the eviction notice, then at the black card on the table. The choice was clear. Abandon her integrity and use the card, or lose everything. For a moment, she let herself imagine it. The look on Henderson's face when she handed him a stack of cash. The relief of security. But the image soured in her mind. It wouldn't be a victory. It would be a surrender of the only thing she truly owned. Her character. With a deep, shuddering breath, she made a different choice. She took the $100 bill from the stranger and the last $43 from the register. She walked not to the bank, but to the grocery store. She didn't buy boxes to pack her life away. She bought potatoes, onions, carrots, ground beef, and bread. She spent the entire afternoon in the diner's kitchen, the familiar motions of cooking a balm to her frayed nerves. She chopped and stirred, pouring all her fear and sorrow into the huge pot of stew. As evening fell, she packed it all up and carried it down the street to Harmony Creek's small, underfunded homeless shelter. She spent her last evening in her diner not packing, but serving hot meals to the town's most overlooked residents, her heart aching but strangely, profoundly at peace. The next morning, Lena was carefully wrapping her parents' photograph in a dish towel when a succession of quiet, powerful engines disturbed the morning calm. A fleet of 4 black sedans, gleaming like polished obsidian, slid to a stop in front of the diner. Her heart leapt into her throat. Mr. Henderson coming with the sheriff? But it wasn't Henderson who stepped out of the lead car. It was Arthur Vance. The weary traveler was gone. In his place stood a man of immense presence, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He was flanked by several other people in sharp business attire, who moved with an air of quiet efficiency. "Lena," he said, his voice the same low rumble she remembered, but now it held an unmistakable note of command. "Mr. Vance," she breathed, clutching the framed photo to her chest. "I see you've been busy," he said, his eyes glancing toward the packed boxes. Then his gaze softened. "My associate informed me you paid a visit to the shelter last night." He had been watching. The realization dawned on her. The card wasn't just a reward. It was a final, crucial test of her character. "You had the means to solve your own problems," he continued, "but you chose to help others instead." Just then, Mr. Henderson's car screeched to a halt behind the black sedans. He stormed toward the diner, his face red with fury. "What is the meaning of this? Hughes, I told you to be out by—" He stopped short as a woman from Vance's team, holding a leather portfolio, stepped directly into his path. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cool and clipped. "I'm Claire Sterling, legal counsel for Vance Holdings. I believe you were in negotiations to sell this property." Henderson puffed out his chest. The deal is done. This entire block is sold. It is, Claire agreed with a thin smile. It was sold yesterday morning. To us. She tapped the portfolio. Vance Holdings is the new owner of this entire city block, which I'm afraid makes Mr. Vance your boss's boss. And as of 5 minutes ago, your development deal has been terminated. Henderson's face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the lawyer to Arthur Vance, who was watching him with cold, impassive eyes. The landlord's swagger evaporated, replaced by a trembling, sputtering confusion. He looked like a deflated balloon. Vance ignored him completely, his attention focused solely on Lena. "My apologies for the theatrics," he said gently. "Sometimes it's the only way to make a point." His team began to move with purpose. One man approached Lena. "Miss Hughes," he said, "we're a contracting team. We're here to handle the renovations." Another person, an accountant, began explaining that the deed to the diner and the 2 apartments above it were being transferred into her name, free and clear. A trust fund, she was told, had been established in her name, containing enough money to ensure she would never have to worry about bills again. It was a cascade of miracles, a tidal wave of fortune that left her breathless and dizzy. The news spread through Harmony Creek as if carried on the wind. The little diner, bought by a billionaire. The waitress, Lena, is rich now. The transformation was immediate. The diner was closed for 1 week. During that time, a small army of workers descended. They installed a brand new kitchen with gleaming stainless steel appliances. The cracked vinyl booths were replaced with plush, comfortable seating. The floors were retiled, the walls repainted a warm, inviting cream. A beautiful, handcrafted wooden sign was hung out front, reading simply, "Lena's Place." On reopening day, the line stretched down the block. The entire town, it seemed, had come to witness the spectacle. Mr. Vance stood beside Lena as she prepared to cut a red ribbon tied across the doorway. He leaned in and spoke quietly, for her ears only. "My father was a good man who lost everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "One cold night. A kind woman running a diner just like this one gave him a hot meal and a bus ticket when he had nothing. It was enough to help him start over. He never forgot. Her. I've spent years looking for people like her. People like you." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the people who had ignored her for so long, now looking at her with awe and respect. She cut the ribbon, and as the crowd surged in, she announced that for the entire day, all food was on the house. The community that had once made her feel like an outsider now embraced her, celebrating her as their own. She had a newfound family in Vance and his quiet, loyal team, who became her most regular customers. 6 months later, Lena's Place was the beating heart of Harmony Creek. The neon sign was gone, but the diner was always filled with light and warmth. Lena had hired a small staff, including 2 single mothers from the shelter, giving them the same chance she had been given. She took weekends off now, spending them reading in the park or driving to the coast. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a benefactor, a friend, a pillar of her community. One evening, during the dinner rush, she paused with a pot of fresh coffee in her hand, looking out over the bustling, happy room. The air was filled with laughter and the clatter of silverware. In the corner booth, Arthur Vance sat alone, watching her with a quiet, paternal smile. He lifted his coffee mug in a silent toast. Lena smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. It served as a quiet reminder that the value of a person is not found in their bank account, but in the richness of their heart, a currency that, when spent on others, always returns 1,000-fold. If this story touched your heart, be sure to like and subscribe for more tales of kindness rewarded.